All right, everybody, welcome back live at Drew's House. Hope everybody is doing okay. That little thing talks to me right at the beginning every time now. That's a new feature. We're recording. Interesting. But hope everybody's doing okay. Hope you had a good 4th of July, like I mentioned. And yeah, hope everybody's doing well out there. Okay, so we've come back from the holiday. I was up in Maine enjoying my time by the lake. Good family time, good dog time, all that stuff. And I come back to work and everybody is like kind of, I don't know if I'd say rejuvenated, but thrilled about the 4-day work week. Like people are saying I could get used to this. And of course, this isn't the first time this conversation has come up, but I don't know, something feels different about it in a post-pandemic world, I guess. I think I'm fair to say that. So let's bring in an expert, okay? That's what we're gonna do. Professor Juliet Schor joins us from Boston College. She's the expert today on this. How are you, Professor?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thanks so much for taking some time. You have written extensively about this. I've seen, we were just talking a little bit off the air about this, but pros and cons, 4-day work week. Is it possible? Could it happen? And I want to know, like, how does it benefit me? I can already feel the benefits, but I'd like you to tell me.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly possible. I lived in the Netherlands in the 1990s, and what they did was all the folks leaving school who got jobs in the government sector went on to 4-day work weeks. So that was their norm from the beginning of their employment. Now, in those days, they were getting 80% of what a salary would be. But for many people, they didn't have college debt and so forth when they left university, and many of them also were just leaving from high school. But so they started at 80%, but people loved it. And the whole financial sector in the Netherlands was on a 4-day work week at that time. So it's definitely possible. And what I would say is in the last couple of months, there's been really amazing momentum toward a 4-day work week. And I think it's a combination of two things. One is the impact of the pandemic, and we can get into why that is. And the other is the realities of white-collar work in the 21st century, which make switching to a 4-day work week actually a lot more feasible than at an earlier time.
Okay, I want you to get into the post-pandemic thing in a moment, but I want to ask this follow-up first, and maybe they go together, I'm not sure. What has always been preventing, because I've heard this conversation for all of my professional working life of 10 years. I remember hearing about it in college. I remember professors talked through it around back when I was in college. What prevents the US? What is the biggest sticking point from not going in that direction in this country?
Probably it's been the fact that health insurance is paid for by employers, which means employers don't like short hours. They like to have smaller number of people working longer hours. So that's a really big dimension of it. In many of the other places that have not only are kind of thinking about going to a 4-day work week now, but the places that have continued to reduce average hours of work since the 1970s, and the United States is not one of those. Our hours have gone in the other direction. Those places tend to have health insurance that's paid for in different ways, typically by the state. But where you've got those additional big per person costs for the employer, they don't want to hire more people. They like long hours and a smaller workforce.
Interesting. All right, so let's talk about that because I know you wanted to go there. What would you say is the feeling of post-COVID is definitely playing a role here, right? There's something to that.
Yes. And there are a couple of different things. One is many people had their work reorganized during COVID to remote work. And so the sort of sense of possibility of how work could be different is very much alive. That coincides with what had been a sort of rising conversation about the quote unquote future of work and how artificial intelligence and technology is going to change work. But the other thing about it is that the pandemic proved to be really difficult, not for the wealthy so much. Whatever their work situations were, they left the cities, they went to their vacation homes, they had a relatively easy time of it, and many of them made extraordinary amounts of money during the pandemic. But if we think about the two other groups, the middle class and the working class had a horrible time Many of them lost their jobs, or they were in these very dangerous frontline jobs. They experienced COVID at a really high rate, and they had the, whatever issues, the childcare and so forth. And then you had the middle class, which was economically more stable, those who could, keep getting a paycheck and do remote work. I mean, it's not the majority. I read a statistic today saying something like 1/6 of workers had that. But for them, the issue was childcare and how difficult it was to work during the pandemic and take care of children or other family members and so forth. And so that sense of burnout and kind of imbalance of work and life was overwhelming. Many Americans, particularly women, had already been experiencing that before the pandemic. The pandemic really heightened it. And the so-called Overton window opening, the sense that the pandemic gave us that all sorts of new things are possible, whether it's the government giving people a child care credit or the basic income experiments that are going on, or, government just sending checks to people, keeping people on payrolls, all of these things that neoliberal economics told us we couldn't have suddenly are becoming possible. And shorter work hours it just snuck right in through that Overton window in a way that I don't think anyone anticipated, but here it is. And suddenly people are saying, yeah, shouldn't we be working less?
It is fascinating. And there is a real quality of life thing there too. I mean, you mentioned burnout with parents, and we can talk about that a little bit more too, because I am at that age, or I don't have kids myself, but I am in that young adult, a lot of my friends are, my cousins are. I don't think our parents even realize how much childcare has risen over the last, since they were doing it. We can talk a little bit more about that. But that whole quality of life idea of just having more time to not be in the office or your virtual office, I don't know. But there is a real sense of things are so much different when you have that extra day off, and I think everybody feels it.
Yes, and certainly, I wrote a book on working hours in the United States that came out in 1992. So I've been following this issue for a long time. A sort of 4-day work week is always consistently the most popular way to get shorter hours of work. So people like it a lot more than more vacation time or shorter daily hours or whatever it is. But the idea of having a 3-day weekend every week, by far the most popular way to give people more time, and for obvious reasons. I mean, you can do more in a day than you can in a little bit of extra time every day. And then of course there's the commuting, the ability to avoid one day of commuting for people who commute.
And you mentioned, I'm sorry, what country was it before that had done this before?
The Netherlands.
The Netherlands. So they do the 4-day, and you had mentioned it was 80% pay. So yes, there are ways of drawing that out to 100% pay too, though, right? Where 4 hours and you increase the hours, but a lot of people have said, I'd be willing to work a longer day if you give me the extra day off, right?
Yes. So we've had experiments in the United States or situations where people are doing what's called the compressed work week, which is 4 10-hour days. And that is popular also. But the movement that is growing, getting steam now, the so-called 4-day week movement, is 5 days pay, 4 days work. Now, part of the reason, and this gets to the second point that I made about the nature of white-collar work in the 21st century, part of the reason is the white-collar workforce has gotten very unproductive. Labor, the white-collar workplace has gotten very unproductive in many ways. Too many meetings, too many emails, too much information. The computer slashed the cost of information. So it's just free to send information to people. People are inundated with information. They're inundated with communication, meetings, etc. And a lot of that is low value. So what these cases where we've seen around the world where people said, okay, we're going to keep paying you for 5 days. You only have to work for 4, but reorganize work, is that people were able to do as much in 4 as they had done in 5 by cutting out all that unnecessary stuff. When Microsoft did an experiment like this in Japan, they found that productivity actually went up. Andrew Barnes in New Zealand, the owner of an insurance company called Perpetual Guardian, who actually did an academic study of his workplace when they went to this, found that their productivity, self-reported productivity, went up. So this is another reason why it's actually on the table right now, and why you have governments all over the place who are instituting these 4-day work week trials. So the Spanish government is doing, the Scottish government is doing. I'm actually going to be researching the Irish pilot, which the Irish government is putting money into to study. We've got private initiatives here in the United States. Iceland, the Icelandic government is doing it. And, I predict in the next couple of months, we're going to learn about many more places around the world who want to study this kind of a shift. And part of it is that this is something, as you say, that's been predicted for a long time. There have been some sort of bumps along the road, but the combination of pandemic, artificial intelligence, changing demographics of the labor force, all of these things are conspiring, I think, in a way that is going to put more and more countries on a path to a 4-day work week.
Call me a pessimist, Professor, but it seems like a very big tanker to turn in this country. I don't know. It feels like this maybe isn't a couple of years down the road. Maybe you're starting to see big turns, but I mean, how soon could you actually see this being a widespread thing? When you say it's gaining steam, like, where do you really see that from your professional point of view?
Well, you see it more outside the United States, but the US pilot was just announced, and Kickstarter is heading that effort, and we'll see how many companies they get. But I just think I would say a decade from now, it's going to be a very significant movement in the US, and considerably earlier in other places. I mean, you have a lot of forces that are conspiring in that direction. The younger generations do not want to be kind of chained to a job in the same way that older generations felt they had to be. And they're just a lot more interested in 4-day weeks. I see it in a number of contexts. I had two contexts just last week. A doctor talked to me about how the pandemic led them to reorganize their practice to work fewer hours. And this is like a specialist practice, a cardiology practice. That surprised me. And we're seeing it across the NGO world as more and more NGOs are moving their workforces down, their employees down to shorter hours of work. So I think you're going to see it in some of the bigger companies, particularly the white-collar companies. It's probably going to go along with remote working, and there will be these pilots, and then you'll see, you've already started to see it gradually with the summer, where more and more places give people Fridays off in the summer. And so you're also going to see it gradually spread out from there. And they're doing it without asking for pay back, for example.
I'd imagine too, and maybe history shows this, that once those bigger companies do jump on board with this, it probably starts to spread like wildfire a little bit, right? Other companies following suit?
It does spread. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to go to everyone. I mean, there are plenty of people in this country who don't have access to paid vacation. So we have a labor market in which you've got, big differences in the conditions of work for people at the firms that are best to work at and those that are worst to work at. But let me throw one final point into the conversation that has to do with research that I've done, which is, as we get more serious about climate change and meeting emissions targets, we will see that reduced work time is one of the most powerful climate policies that we can find. I have been studying this for many years, looking across countries, looking across the United States over different time periods. And one of the things we see is that the countries with the shortest hours, other things equal, tend to have the lowest emissions. So it's a very powerful way to reduce emissions and also give people something that they really value, which is their time.
Wow, that's another interesting point. I actually had not even thought about that yet. And I would imagine that little, we talk so much, a new word that's been thrown into our vocabulary that we probably use every day now is hybrid. We keep hearing your boss saying that, right? But this person's working hybrid today, or we're gonna do a hybrid schedule for the week. The kids certainly know it in school. Half the class hybrid, half the class, I would imagine when you say that part of it is, I could very easily see a system that maybe says we do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in the office, a Thursday you do hybrid, and if you finish your work, you get Friday off. So I could see things like that, those kind of scenarios. I'm just kind of thinking out loud on that. But
Yeah. I mean, one thing that some of the companies who have done this is they'll put in a pilot of a 4-day week, and they tell people, we want 5 days of work. You can do it in 4 days. That's the way a lot of the conversation is going. And so the question is, can you keep your sales up, or can you keep your productivity figures up? Can we keep our revenue and profitability up? Because this also has real benefits for the companies. People they value these jobs more. They're less likely to quit. They're more likely to go to the doctor on their day off. They're less likely to be sick because they're less stressed and burned out. So there's a sort of a whole set of positive collateral impacts, many of which affect the bottom line of the companies. Particularly in repetitive jobs, or kind of some of those really laborious white-collar jobs, reducing the amount of time that people have to do them can be very beneficial.
Another great point. I'm not surprised you're making great points, trust me, but you think about, I've heard people say, even just, this week, about like, I almost need to take a day off to go to the doctor. Like, I just don't have time to get there. The dentist, you haven't been to the dentist in a while. It's like, well, I got to make time, and I don't have time because by the time I get home, I got these things I got to do. And you almost need to take a day off to do those things. And that would solve that problem.
Yes. And of course, we're also thinking about the gender impacts of this, which is that, as more and more women moved into the labor force, their total work hours rose because they weren't able to reduce hours of work at home in the household, childcare and household labor, as much as their paid hours went up. So we still have a gender imbalance in the household. And one of the things that advocates of 4-day week are interested in is how much it can help to kind of rebalance total workloads between men and women. So, women's hours went up, men's hours didn't go down for the most part. That's the US story, for example, the one I've studied in depth. And so this by actually giving men a whole day off may also help contribute to more gender equity in household labor.
And certainly I cannot tell you how many times I have heard, even just within my old family, the whole child care thing, the young kids running around. And I mean, you're right, that plays such a big role in this. Let me ask you, how has professor life been on a college campus throughout this whole thing? A mess, I take it.
Well, I've taught remotely through the whole pandemic, through the pandemic. I actually have not yet been back on campus. I will do that soon.
Teaching right from here?
Teaching right from here, this very room. The students have been fantastic. I think it was very hard for many of them, but they really hung in, and I'm just so impressed by how much students were able to learn under such adverse and difficult conditions. So shout out to my students and students all across the country, and fingers crossed that we are going to be able to do what we expect, which is to be back in person in the fall.
All right. So as we 4-day work week, as we finish up here, what's the one part that I missed? What's the thing that you really want people to take away from the 4-day work week conversation? Because here we are, we're working a 4-day work week this week. So,
well, I guess the point is that there's a sort of austerity discourse that has been dominant for the last 15, 20 years at least, which is saying we can't do this, we can't do that, the economy won't let us. Meanwhile, what's happened is that There's been fantastic wealth produced, but it's gone to a very small number of people at the top. We've never had so much inequality in the world as we have today, and in the United States. And it's the pandemic really exacerbated this. The billionaires got fabulously wealthy, and average people hurt a lot. And I think what we need to understand is that we can have any kind of economy that we want. There isn't only one, and we can see that whether we look historically or look across countries today, where there are people in other places who have such better situations than the American worker. So whether it's raising the minimum wage or giving healthcare as a right and education as a right, or a 4-day week as a right, which is something that is going to happen, I think, and will make us better off. You know, when we first started talking about having Sunday off or Saturday off, having a 40-hour work week, all of those things were thought to be impossible. And yet, of course, they all, you know, came to be for the most part. I think the real trick with economics is to not let that scarcity idea, the idea that we don't have enough, the idea that we have to chain ourselves to our desks, the idea that the income distribution has to be the way it is, the idea that the government can't be a major player in the economy, all of those things, those ideas which are the bedrock of, you know, what we call neoliberal economics, which became dominant in this country in the last couple of decades. Those are all false ideas, and thankfully they are being pushed out by, I think, a much more, both more correct but also more humane vision of what the economy can and should be.
The times there are changing, I guess, huh?
They certainly are.
Professor Juliet Schor, Boston College, thank you so much for your time. This was fascinating, and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, well, that was just fascinating. I hope you enjoyed that. I am even more on board now than I was before, and I was on board before. Professor Juliet Schor doing a great job breaking down the 4-day work week. We will leave it at that to end the work week. Well, to end you're probably going to go to work tomorrow, but the weekends for the show here. Professor Juliet Schor, thank you so much. Live at Drew's house, another edition. See you next week.